introduce Dr. Stephen Norris.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. First off, my accent, please don't let it worry you when it comes to the sport of hockey, even though I would call it ice hockey 25 years ago. I don't want to come across as big-headed or standing on some kind of pedestal. You need to forget the doctor bit. I've worked in performance sport and development sport now for well over a quarter of a century. I've been responsible for Team Canada hockey now for several Olympic cycles, the women certainly since Salt Lake onwards, and increasingly with the men's senior and junior programs. I've had the great privilege of working with some amazing coaches. My first day on the job with Hockey Canada as the senior physiologist and sports scientist and performance consultant was actually meeting with Tom Rennie and Mike Johnson, just that you saw in a couple of video clips. I've had a very fast baptism with some of the greats. Al Murray has been mentioned, and of course the last two Olympic cycles with Mr. Babcock, who is certainly, I think, one of the finest coaches I've ever worked with in any of the 13 Olympic disciplines that I'm responsible for. I spent 4 Olympic cycles as the Director of Sport Physiology and Strategic Planning for Canada's Winter Olympic Sports, or at least the 11 that are based in Calgary and the Bow Valley Corridor. So I have a rich history, and I've learned a great deal. I've made lots of mistakes. One of the things I want you to understand that in your children, you have to allow them to make mistakes. All the modern brain research shows actually that the brain is activated increasingly through making mistakes. And you learn very carefully and to a much higher level by making mistakes. They're not going to be perfect. They're little children and they're learning. I never get worried about who wins in any sports that I deal with on the winter side. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, it doesn't matter. 85 to 96% of the age group champions are not the people that win when it matters. And I can assure you, I want to win. And any teams I work with, I want to win. But I want to win when it counts, which is typically, in most world-class performance sports, somewhere between the ages of, 23 to about 40. That's where it counts. Doesn't count anywhere else. I know of no other sport on the planet that has as much attention on its world juniors as hockey. And even then, really, only in a few countries that it really bears a lot of relation, largely here. That's why the International Ice Hockey Federation loves hosting the event here. They make lots of money because there's lots of interest. Or you put it just across the border in Buffalo, for example, because they know lots of Canadians will go to the event. Because sure as hell the Americans aren't going to go to it that much. It's a World Junior Championship. But because it's so culturally and politically important for us, we get so wrapped up in it. And of course, that leads to other problems with hockey that I'm going to go through with you. So I'm going to give you some of the basic pop science behind why the previous presentation is something that you should really pay attention to. Why, here we are in 2015, having known this information for at least half a century, we're just getting around to it in our core sport. And if you're actually running a business with the amount of investment of money and children in this sport, we would have all been sacked long ago. How is it Sweden, with 8,000 registered players, outperforms us? How is it California, with roughly the same number as Sweden, outperforms currently the whole of the New England states in the eventual draft? And they play roller hockey a lot of the time. Oh my God. I say that in some communities in Canada and I'd be lynched, particularly with my accent. So I'm going to have some fun with you. We're going to show some video. I'm going to ask you lots of questions. My job is to prod you. Why do I keep coming back to Hockey Manitoba? This is my 3rd time here. I've been, I think, 3 times in a row. I come as a commitment to Peter Woods and what is happening here. Because I can assure you, if we go back 5, 6 years ago, Manitoba, in some of the circles I worked in, wasn't looked upon very favorably. It was seen as a backwater, resistant completely to change, didn't want to move forward, despite a rich history of amazing ability to produce great hockey players. But it's interesting how those players were actually being developed. They're actually doing all the things that you've seen in previous presentations this afternoon by accident. They cycled to school. They played seasonal sport. They were very highly physically active. They challenged their brains. They had high physical work capacities because they were constantly active. They didn't do high-priced training camps left, right, and center. They learned through trial and error. And they certainly didn't do one thing year-round. You would never tolerate your kids going to school and all they're going to do for the year is history. You'd never do that. And in most instances, you would never allow in the arts, so like music and anything like that, and in academia, school, the things we do routinely in children's sport in Canada. We wouldn't have ridiculous practice-to-game ratios like we do now. In other words, you don't teach them anything, but you give them an exam every week. Or worse still, I guarantee probably today, there's people doing tryouts. Tryouts for what? Tryouts to be allowed to play hockey this year, basically. That would be like turning up at school last week when school started, signing up to do mathematics, but you have to do an exam first before we let you take the course. And you laughed at the videos earlier about the scaling of an ice surface. You laughed at some of the other videos of what was going on because we know it's stupid. But of course, everyone and their dog has an opinion on hockey in this country. No different than soccer in the United Kingdom. But here's the funny thing. You wouldn't want me to come and fix your sink if it's bunged up. You won't want me to be the person that's going to come and operate on you because you've got appendicitis. You won't want me to come and do the cabinet making of your $25,000 new kitchen reno. You won't want me to come and service your car. Why? Because I don't have any training in those areas. None. I've got lots of experience, and I could cobble through and read some books and maybe do a little bit of course, and I could watch some YouTube videos. I could do that type of stuff. And yet in sport, with our most precious resource, our 5-year-olds to our 15-year-olds, and why is that the most precious time? Because that's when they're most malleable, most plastic, most capable of really learning. We put those people in the hands of our least qualified, least experienced, and least paid, if at all, people. Us. Now, I'm not slamming you, because the system can't survive with a full professional model like school, but you accept and you expect that if you go to school and you put your kid in grade 1, there's a curriculum suited to grade 1ers, the assessment, aka competition, is relevant to what they're going to learn, and it's taught by someone fully qualified. And then they go to grade 2, and grade 3, and grade 4. And by the way, exams don't get too serious until about grade 10, 11, 12. No one's too worried, as long as you're roughly on the path. And get this, the people that are struggling, you put more time into, not the people that are already good. You take that for granted. So why is it we completely screw it up when we start dealing with age group sport, and particularly the team sports, and particularly this great love of ours for hockey? You've got to ask yourself some serious questions, because it's their lives, not ours. We're doing things for them, not us. We're doing this for them to give them a great time to learn those transferable things into life, because precious few of them are going to make a real living out of playing the game. They may, because of their love of the game, find ancillary things. Maybe they'll become a manager or of a retail outlet. Maybe they make the greatest sticks in the world. Maybe they sharpen the blades of the greatest players in the world. I don't know. But very few of them are going to make a living out of playing the game. Just like anything else. Because it's elite at the top end. It's all about the few from the many. But it's not really about that. It's about age group children having a wonderful time. So as they exit, particularly their high school years, they can look back on their minor association years and say, you know what? I learned a lot and I had a great time. regardless of the performance level. The great ones will move on to where they need to go. The rest of them will move on to be hockey parents of the future, coaches of the future, administrators of the future, perhaps sponsors of age group hockey of the future. That's what it's about. And then you get assholes like me that come in and say, but now we want to win. So you need to give us, at aged 17, 18, 19, that raw product that has a capability to win. And now we get into Babcock territory, where we start talking about that grit, that determination, the ability to think, to make decisions under pressure, to understand game theory. They can already skate. They can turn right and left. They can skate backwards effectively. They can do all these things with minimal space and time because they're getting shut down very quickly by very competent players. That is light years away from what we're all doing here. Light years. Not even the same. And yet you're under massive pressure in your system because that top end, particularly the professional bit, and unfortunately bits just below it, keep digging further and further down into the system and causing you to make decisions. You get age group drafts that come deeper and deeper and deeper that force more adult decisions on youngsters and their parents. Because they don't care. They're just looking for some product coming through. They're not invested in the development. It's not as though they hand over wealth of resources to help the process. They don't care. They don't need to. Their bottom line is completely different to yours. So we have to think about what we truly value. What do I think athleticism looks like? Because I've just spent 3 weeks watching the Baby Flames in Calgary. And this is the first generation we're starting to see of kids who had early specialized. These people can't even run. They have a veneer of a physical work capacity because they're good. You see them on the ice. They look like hockey players. But their ability to withstand load and volume, all these type of things, sucks compared even to our Olympic teams. I'd rather take the skeleton team and show you an athlete can withstand challenge, can withstand pressure. I don't know where we're going to go in the next few years. It's going to be tough. Where will Team Canada come from? Because that has to bear into my role. One of the things we did change very dramatically, previous presentation talked about the junior camps through the summer. We used to have junior camps where we'd only bring in a few players across the country in each of the age groups. Now we're systematically bringing in the U17s, U18s, World Junior groups, and as many coaches as we can to really try and push the envelope. Not just sharpening the point too soon. And getting back to basics. Skill, 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 skill. You can teach systems. Dead easy. The problem we've got, including me, my coach, is that how good are we at actually teaching skills? Because I can assure you anyone, including me, can pick up a playbook and teach a system. Teach a bunch of kids to look like a bunch of robots and off they go. But did we actually teach them what it means to have soft hands? To actually receive the puck at light speed off your non-dominant foot when turning in your non-preferred direction? And what that actually means, and how do you get better? And what does play work once you leave the training vicinity look like? In other words, what does the homework look like between now and the next time you see them? Remembering that they're not going to have ice. So what does it look like? Do you have a little Swedish practice board? Do you have a table tennis board? Whatever it might be, because you can teach skills anywhere, anytime, any place, under any conditions. You do not need $1 million ice surface or whatever you're paying per hour. If you use creativity, we could run tactics and skills outside in the car park right now. Right now. Teach them everything you need to know. And then we could use our precious ice time for what we really need to do. But people don't look at it like, oh, not hockey. So here's Damien Waters. This guy's not a gymnast. He's a parkour expert. Parkour is a growing trend over the last decade and a half of urban gymnastics. And where you'll see him in the gym practicing the basic moves in a nice, safe environment so that when he has to do them for real, where there is real risk, He can do these things, but they don't happen by accident. You'll also notice he'll do things requiring a gross motor skill and a fine motor skill. So a gross motor skill in hockey would be the actual skating motion, and a fine motor skill might be receiving the puck and then threading the needle with the pass, and all while not losing stride. You look at even in the NHL, how many players actually have to go to a glide to make the fine motor skill. They can't actually do it in their brain. How could you train that? Well, first off, you got to teach them to skate. And we do a terrible job in hockey of teaching people to skate. We often abdicate that to other groups to do. How pathetic is that? This is the #1 skill. Why do you think the Finns and the Swedes and even the Americans increasingly teach skating first? Skate, 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 skate. Turn in both directions. Skate backwards, skate forwards, lateral, jump. Feel what it likes to have two people hanging off you and still skate and keep your balance. Just simply getting up off the ice. From your front, from your back. Non-dominant leg, dominant leg. We don't teach that stuff, and yet we expect them to be able to play hockey. It's going to happen by magic. And then we complain by the time they're 12, oh, that guy can't skate backwards. And then what happens at age 23 is I get phone calls every year from NHL teams. Steve, got a 23-year-old defenseman. Can we send him to you guys in Calgary, teach him to skate backwards? To which the simple answer is no, because you're not patient enough. Give us 6 months, we might be able to break down those movement patterns and get after something he should have learned 10 years previously. But really what we'll do, because you're going to send him to us for a couple of weeks, first off, he'll get a rest, okay? So that'll do him wonders. Secondly, we'll do some strength and conditioning with him and do something more of an athleticism point of view, coupled to the rest, and he'll suddenly look as though he can skate backwards better. But of course, as soon as he gets tired or gets put under a pressure situation, he will revert back to the movement pattern he learnt and is ingrained in his brain 10 years earlier. And of course, no one has any patience, because the next season is always right there. Right there. So we throw children away. We throw youth away all the time. say, what's the relevance of that for hockey? If you really watch hockey at the performance level, you know that often as not, they are flying through the air, but they do need to have amazing spatial awareness. They're often not on both feet. They're often stepping across all sorts of traffic that's in their way. They're threading the needle not only with the puck, but with themselves. So spatial awareness and understanding is massive, and that's before you start having goons hanging off them and truly having to understand how they have to move. Movement is a brain skill developed over a long period of time. You have to expose your youngsters to as many different stimuli as possible, not slam doors in their face. It's a very difficult task, being age group focused. There are so many parameters. Just look at all the different shapes and sizes you're dealing with. We're going to go through some of that theory behind so you understand why these statements are being made to you. Parenting 101. And age group coaching, we need to put far more resources into this. Far more resources. The old NCCP program, so the National Coaching Certification Program, up until very recently, you have level 1, which many people get, and the associated hockey-specific components, and everyone usually bails at that point. You've done your weekend, and you do a few other things. You come to stuff like this, must know all about hockey, plus I'm Canadian, and I played hockey, I know it all. Interesting perspective. But it is true, if you're prepared to use the Hockey Canada resources, an incredible array of material, free, plus the USA Hockey, most of that you can get to free, plus all the Swedish information. I know of no other sport on the planet that has such a library of information readily available in English and to some degree in French. I don't know of a sport like that. You can get your hands on the Russian stuff. Hallelujah. You're off to the races. So there's no excuse for us. No excuse. But the problem with the NCC originally was you could get to level 2 and level 3, largely that's all of the provincial level. Levels 4 and 5 reserved for the national teams. In fact, you can't go to a second Olympics until you have either level 4 or 5. You get a grace period on the first Olympics. That's actually when they teach growth and development. But who are those coaches coaching? The national teams. Those kids are aged 23 to 33 in most of the sports. They're not teaching the little kids. So we don't actually teach this type of information that you're going to see to the people that need it. The parents and the age group coaches, the volunteers that are really dealing with the youngsters and need to have the patience. And don't let anyone tell you that competition isn't important. It's absolutely vital, right from the get-go. But it's just what it looks like, which doesn't mean to say it looks like a full-on NHL game. Because that is a very, very poor return on investment of time, at the very least, let alone the money you're putting into it. You have to think about continual improvement. Are you continually improving everything? So tomorrow, actually probably this morning, I guarantee there was high performance or centers of excellence for 8-year-olds in hockey in this city. Guarantee it. The only thing that should be high performance or excellent is the quality of the instruction, because the players certainly are not. They're 2 decades away from being excellent, even if they have that capability. But the instruction needs to be that. We need to be world-leading, at the very least world-class, instructors of kids. That's a completely different ball of wax than pretending we're just going to win a whole bunch of meaningless games. I'm harsh with you, deliberately, because they are meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And remember, for every meaningless game that is won by a particular team, it means a meaningless game was lost by a particular team. So always remember that flip side of what we're teaching our youngsters. See the 2 sets of parents. One set, they all sit down one side of the benches, and they're all cheering madly when something goes their way, and then it's down to this side, and they're cheering madly. But sooner or later, unless you can stomach a tie or a drawn game, someone loses, even at the early stage. Now, losing is important, for sure. But always remember, there's a flip side. You better have very strong messaging as parents to help those youngsters move through those phases of winning and losing in life, because life is full of that. This construct of where performance starts, for me, in my world, very narrow world of performance, high performance starts at the top 10% of all the participants in a competitive vein in any particular domain we're talking about. It's all the best skiers in the world, all the best hockey players, all the best ski jumpers, whatever it might be. Top 10%. Everyone else is not high performance. And we'd all like to be 1 in 10, wouldn't we? But 1 in 10, in the case of hockey, you won't make Team Canada, you won't go to the Olympics, you certainly won't go to the NHL, all those type of things. So you have to have a better idea than high performance. And we might look at this sandcastle and say, well, that's a high performance sandcastle. Okay, it's pretty good. It's got a clearly discerned outer shell. We know instantly it's a sandcastle. It's got a really good firm base, and it's even on a beach. 10 out of 10. Until you turn around and you walk 100 meters down the beach, and then you see a world-class sandcastle. Now, this sandcastle immediately set the bar completely differently than your expectations based on the previous one. So what I'm trying to get across to you is, are you prepared to be the previous sandcastle in age group hockey development in this province? Because somewhere, someone and a group is doing this. And of course, that's world class. And world class is just a Kodak moment in time, because if you're really committed to this pursuit, as we roll forward the years, where Hockey Manitoba and all its membership is now, you need to have moved that bar in 3 years' time to something better. Constantly improving, the Japanese principle of Kaizen, continual improvement, which means you need to be thinking about this sandcastle very quickly. And this is a world-leading sandcastle. The difference between high-performance, world-class, and world-leading. And the difference between world-leading and world-class is that continual improvement. This is our program right now, but you're constantly wanting to review it to improve it the next year. I don't like when we start talking about, here are the rules for our initiation program. No, these are the guidelines. This is the framework to provide a better program. Because unfortunately, age group sport is littered with rules designed by adults. I picked up the rule book for Calgary minor soccer a few years ago, and the vast majority of the rules in the handbook, outside of the actual rules of field of play, were to actually stop adults cheating. Stop adults cheating. Zones, and you've got to live here to play on this type of team, and you've got to do this type of stuff, and you've got to get your registration in by this amount of time. Bullshit. It's got nothing to do with the children. Nothing. And in some instances, because we can't play fair, we handicap good development with children. Because they should be able to go anywhere they live to be able to get the best possible instruction. We'll talk about that a bit later on. Kind of came up with the whole concept of living close by and building systems and the breakfast club and all those type of elements. Bringing people in reach and outreach programs. Where is the level of expertise? Because surely we're all in this together. Surely we're not just so regionalized that one area of Manitoba or one part of this particular city is so anti every other bit that we're prepared to hold children back in terms of their development. So I hope I'm turning the light bulb on in terms of making you think a little bit. You have to have an idea of the dashboard. What does the dashboard of hockey competency look like for an 8-year-old? So at the age of 8, what should they be able to do? I throw them a puck, show them what you can do. And then 10, and then 12, and then 14, and then 16, and then finally, the masses that leave Minor Association Hockey in Manitoba, what are they able to do? What have you actually taught them? All of them. You've got a bell-shaped curve. You're going to have some ahead of the curve, some behind the curve, the middle masses. What does that look like year on year? You need a disciplined approach. Certainly for the adults, we need to be disciplined. Not get caught up too much in the rhetoric and the emotion, not live vicariously just through the children. Got to send those important messages that teach them a bit about life. It needs to be a fun approach, yet challenging. You know that if you look at the last 3 major studies on team sports in North America, not just Canada, North America, so this would be basketball and hockey and soccer and football and all these types of things, if you talk to the children and you look at the results, when they were asked all the way, if you look at the hockey data, from initiation through to major junior, the number one reason for staying in the game was having fun. The number one reason for leaving the game, not having fun. You need to understand what motivates an 8-year-old versus a 12-year-old versus a 16-year-old, and they're certainly very different motivators than us. We need to have information and understanding. It's not just good enough for us to give you information. You've got to read it and understand what it means. And then you have to rigorously apply it. I understand what this is and have the patience for it to take effect. Oh, I tried that, it doesn't work. Oh, we did that 20 years ago. Well, I bet you didn't, actually. And you certainly never gave things a chance. You need to be true students of your pursuit. You want to be a student of hockey? Then truly understand things. And I don't mean just the cursory stats. We talked about skill. Do you understand what it really means to set an edge on a skate? Have you actually felt that truly yourself? The inside of your dominant foot, the outside of your dominant foot, the inside of your non-dominant foot versus the outside. What does that actually look like? Here's one of the most important things you need to understand on this concept of teaching skill. Between the ages of 0 through to about 14 years of age, the most powerful way children learn is through mimicry, copying. That means you need to be able to demonstrate perfectly. How many of you can do that on even simple tasks? So, how do you get around that when you're not that good yourself? You can use other tools. You could certainly use someone within the peer group. You could use an older group that perhaps have already mastered that task, because that's very powerful for youngsters, because they see people not too much older than them and think, I can do that because they can. That's why often the most powerful motivators, particularly as you look at teenagers, and we say they're massive risk takers. We're going to talk about brain development in a minute. We think they're risk takers. Well, actually, they understand risk pretty well, despite the fact that the prefrontal cortex is developing as part of the latest component in brain development, possibly as late as 19, 20, 21 years of age. But what they do is when they're in their peer group, there is clear pressure to take larger risks. They won't do it on their own, and they won't do it when adults are present. But when their peer group is there, they take massive risk. That's just part of their development. You need to understand these concepts. That's why we need to do a much better job of the Parenting 101 classes that we give you. What is the important information to understand? What age group you're dealing with? Here are the big 5 things. Think about these things. On the ice, off the ice. That's why this type of stuff is put out for you. It's not meant to handicap you. It's not meant to stifle your creativity. It's a framework. At certain ages in Hockey Canada's long-term player development guide, here are the things that are important. Oh, and by the way, if you read the chapters, here are all the resources. Here's the DVDs, here's the pamphlets, here's the book, here's the online information that you can get to help you learn a little bit about this phase. None of it is there to take away your own thought patterns. None of it is there to handicap you or put you in handcuffs and stop you doing some great things. It's to give you resources because they recognize that you've all got jobs. And this has taken years to assemble. Here's an interesting, this particular graph was actually taken from the Department of Psychiatry's website at the University of Alberta. Okay? This is actually a graph of the relative age effect. This is the distribution of birth months from the Ontario Junior League and the Western Junior League, who eventually use this as a stepping stone to the NHL. So you can see very clearly that it's about 15% of them are born up in around January. You've got another sort of 12 to 14% born in February. And if you actually look at it, by the time you get halfway through the year, you're heading north of 70, 75% born in the first half of the year. You've got to remember that the administrative capture aspect of hockey is January the 1st to December 31st. So what you're basically looking at here, because these guys, of course, are now 16, 17 years of age, 18 years of age, is that they were born early in the catchment phase where then they have an advantage from growth and maturation. And earlier than this, they kept getting self-selected to the next level because they demonstrated, because they tended to be bigger, more powerful at atom, pee-wee, whatever it was, they would move on to the next tier. And because we don't really move children, despite our tiering process, really substantially from year to year, it's almost that you're set in place. And there's a very good reason for tiering. If it's used well, it's a very, very good system. But you need to be totally capable of moving children constantly, up and down. But we don't. And we get these types of things happening. So we throw away kids born late in catchment years. And you think it's just isolated hockey? No, I can show you the data for soccer. They have a different administrative components. July 1st round to June 30th. And you'll see everyone born July, August, September. And not many born April, May, June. Exactly the same reasons. This is purely adults making these decisions administratively and not having any patience through the fog of puberty. This is what kids say about adults. A lot of this data from hockey, of this particular survey. The adults should just let me play. They should encourage me more. They should let me express myself during games. But we know what goes on. That doesn't happen. We rarely allow children to think about the ability to make mistakes. Just go out there and play. We don't actually teach them game theory, because all these games are the same. It's about penetration and resistance to that. In most of the team sports, even in tennis, penetration, deep with the ball. Resist the penetration coming back. So do we actually teach what that means? Why is it all the guys that do computing science understand that? Because they put those theories into the games they produce for us to play. From Call of Duty through to any of even the motor racing games. But we don't teach that. We don't even teach our coaches that. This is why this particular drill works. No, we'll teach the pattern, and we have to play it like robots. But if we actually taught the players why these things, they could play anything. And more importantly, when things break down, they would know what to do to correct something in the moment. Classic read and react. It makes me laugh when we talk about read and react. We don't teach read and react. We occasionally expose them to variable situations. That's what we do. And we certainly don't teach game theory. Here's some data to drive things home for you a little bit more. So on the bottom axis, you've got January, February, March, April, May, June, so forth, right? You've got percentage as they move from elite midget, okay, to the NHL in terms of when they were born. So you can see in elite midget, it's already set up the bias to what happens next. So you gradually get the people born earlier in the year, a greater percentage of them move on. So by the time they get to the NHL, 56% born in the first 3 months of the year. There's nothing to do, ultimately, with true growth and maturation and development. It's purely to do with the luck of the month that they were born in. And actually, it's not that. It's when their parents had sex, which was probably the previous April, right? Here's some interesting stuff. This is Soberlap's work at Queen's University. Now, he played at a very high level, and his prof, Jean Coté, they produced this report recently. So what you've got is the first 2 decades of life along the bottom, and then the number of hours that they're doing a particular activity. So most of the players who really made it to elite levels of hockey, the NHL, the AHL, playing in Europe, those type of things, they had deliberate play in all sorts of different things when they were young. They did lots of stuff, because when they got serious later on, they didn't do as much play, but they had lots of it when they were young. Lots of downtime doing all sorts of stuff. Could be anything from playing with their Lego, riding their bike, playing street hockey, whatever, okay? But there's lots of it. Compared to this one, this is other sports. Sorry, it's in red. It's other sports. So you can see that these elite hockey players played lots and lots of sports. And just as with virtually every other Olympic or professional sports person that I know of, with data from the United States, from Canada, from the United Kingdom, from Australia, from Germany, Hungary, you name it, they show clearly that the very best don't typically specialize in these late specialization sports until around 14, 15, and 16. The Americans have a landmark study from 2000 showing exactly where their Olympians came from. And surprisingly, don't specialize until typically 14, 15 years of age. Organized games for hockey gradually increased, and then, of course, when they got to the more serious level, a lot more games. A lot more games. And, of course, the big one, deliberate practice in hockey. Deliberate practice, just as you saw from the clips earlier, from Babcock's practices to you name it, Mike Johnson's group. Lots of practice when they reach these upper levels, of course. But down here, lots and lots of variability. And these are the best. But it's changing on us quite dramatically. That's what's scaring me and scaring all our staff. Because you know what will happen? It's been bad enough for the last 4 Olympic cycles. I was sent an email a few years ago on a Monday morning after a friend of mine had attended a sports science conference in Singapore, actually. A very small community of the high-performance sports scientists worldwide. And he'd been into it. I don't know why I didn't go, but I was probably busy. And he said, you'll never know, you never guess what someone said about you in the middle of their presentation, Steve. And I said, well, who was it? And he told me, and it was a mentor of mine from another country, okay? Eastern European. And he said, Steve Norris runs world-class remedial programs in Calgary with Canada's national teams. Thank God he said world-class, because I was pretty depressed with the word remedial. But you know what? When I got down off my little ego hobby horse, he was absolutely right, because he knew what we did. We were running remedial programs to try and catch up, because I wait in Calgary for 18 to 23-year-olds to knock on the door. Steve, I want to get on one of Canada's national junior teams. Sure, come on in. And then we have a look at them, and they usually have a modicum of their technical sport, whatever it is, alpine skiing, hockey, you name it. They have a reasonable understanding of tactics, whether it's a pacing tactic or a tactic in a team sport. But they have a modicum of athleticism, very poor. And then what we have to do is try to break them down and start again. Just like building a Lego tower. You don't build a Lego tower with one brick and expect it to have stability up here. You build it with a firm base, get to this height. Then you have to build a bigger base, get to this height. Keep going back to the basics as you build up the competency higher and higher. So it can't be pushed over easily. And why is that important? Because when you get sick or injured, without that base, you have nothing to rely on. This is why we see increasingly hockey players and football players not having particularly long careers. Because once they get that catastrophic injury, there's little chance for them to get back. What we see, as you see from the sport medicine data around children, the awful injuries children are carrying into the rest of their lives because we treat them like Olympians or pros at a young age. More and more of the same, despite the fact that, for example, their growth plates haven't even closed. And we wonder why then, when they get serious bone injuries, that they're screwed for life. Or skiers that are on their like 5th or 6th knee surgery by the time they're 15. We didn't teach them to ski. We taught them to hurl themselves on full World Cup racing equipment, because that's what the parents buy, down a hill on an icy surface. And when things go wrong at 90 kilometers an hour, they go wrong in a big way. But the kid has to walk, get out of bed on a cold winter's morning for the rest of their life. Brain development. So you might think that you're suddenly looking at an adult age 16. You've got this 6'5" guy, he's shaving twice a day, okay? He's got big muscles and all this type of stuff. Doesn't tell you anything about the brain. So as we go from the top left-hand corner to the bottom right-hand corner, we're seeing the maturation of the brain, as denoted by moving from the yellowy, greeny color to the more indigo color. And I want you to focus on the top line of brains, okay, where the front of the brain is to the right-hand side, so this bit here, down there, okay, that's what that prefrontal cortex I talked about. This is the executive decision-making bit of the brain. This is the thing that handles things like reasoning, dealing with authority, timekeeping, risk management, those type of elements. These things happen very late in the process, as you can see, as they move into their early 20s. This is why if any of you got teenagers, you're on hiding to nothing. They don't get out of bed till noon on a Saturday. They don't deal with authority very well. They take those risks when they're with their group. Every time they get in their car and go off with their friends, you need to be worried, because that is how they're hardwired at that moment in time. When you're around, you just have to deal with the antagonism, but usually they're on the straight and narrow. When they're out of sight, then you've got serious things. And you give them a curfew time to come in or whatever it is, they're late, because they don't give a shit, because they're hardwired that way. Doesn't really matter. Does not really matter. You need to understand that even though they look like an adult, they're not. And all the way up until then, if we go further back up this way, little 10-year-olds, some of you may be coaching and seeing kids once or twice a week. If it's once a week, good luck. Somewhere between 7 to 8, 9, because their ability to remember stuff until it's really, really ingrained is quite weak. Man, they'd be lucky to remember your name, let alone what they did last week on the ice. And we're still, until about the age of 12, 13, using prior experience in new situations is almost absent. So it's no good saying, well, we taught you this last week and it's slightly different this week. No, you literally have to spoon feed them. And never be frightened of always going back to basics with them. Let's have a bit more fun with you. First 2 decades of life along the bottom in years, percentage of the final adult state. So 100%, so the top line, if we drew across vertically, would be what an adult is like. So we're going to look at this first line. This is brain development. This is the neural development of the human body, aka brain size, brain weight, the hardwiring of the nervous system. This is like the internet of the body. This is how we communicate. So you can see in the first decade, massive, massive advances. This is why a baby has a big head in relation to their body, because the brain is growing very, very fast. Because over our human evolution, we don't have to worry about walking around as a baby. Why? Because we've got a mother and father that carry us around. So we don't have to build bodies with legs and arms too quickly. We need to build the head first. Let's learn some experience. Let's learn how to control it. Normally you sit a baby at 6 months, they've got this big head on their body and this squat stuff. And if you've seen them, once the head starts to move off center, bang, over they go. That actually has nothing to do with the fact that they don't have a large amount of muscle mass. It's all to do with the fact they actually haven't learned to control the neck muscles to keep the head above the body. But a few weeks later, they have. They have. And it's not until we start to get into early teens that we start to see the head get a little bit more proportionate with the rest of the body as this happens. And then at around 12 through to 14, this sort of plateauing in the brain size starts to occur as the brain ruthlessly culls those new synaptic junctions. So this period before that was the greatest change in terms of all those neural junctions that were developing. Does this mean to say that doesn't happen in the rest of life? No, it does. It's just this is the greatest period. And then we get this period of stability. And what's happening through this period of stability is we're learning to use all these pathways. So it's just like the energy systems. There's a capacity and then there's a power. So we're learning to use the power of the brain. And this will continue for the rest of life. This alone should scream at you why you expose children in that first decade and a half of life to as many different things as possible, because you want to build that as vast as possible. Because they get into that second decade and the brain is saying, whew, don't need all that shit now, I'm just doing these things. And the sooner you do that, the more of the handicap you give these youngsters. Can they overcome it? Yes, it's like that skater I said, a hockey player at 23, if you're patient, but it takes an enormous amount of effort now. And no one has that patience. compared to this line. This is the one everyone gets worried about. This is the hormonal line. In this case, we're showing a rough approximation of the male sex hormone testosterone, present in both males and females, but obviously at a higher circulating level in the males. This is responsible for, not responsible, it's part of the signaling mechanism that leads to many of the changes to do with puberty, the big growth spurt, the laying down of muscle mass. Pretty pointless doing any big strength training for muscle mass gain prior to this happening. Do kids get stronger before this? Of course they do. But they get stronger, just like the little baby, by learning how to control their body, not by building muscle mass. It's a neural response. Same as any of you in here. If we hadn't done any strength training, when we go into the gym for the next 6 weeks, you will get stronger. You will probably notice a loss of fat mass, but you won't have put on much muscle mass. You'll get better toned, but it's because the distribution is changing. But how have you got stronger? Because you're now learning to use the muscle mass you have. Until now, over a period of time and greater protein synthesis, you start to put on muscle mass. But that's a secondary, longer phase. So it happens in us in the same sequence, but in children, because they don't have any testosterone at a circulating level that's required, you don't get hypertrophy pre-puberty. That's why I don't like seeing kids doing mammoth weight training sessions and all this type of stuff at young ages, aside from the fact that the bones may well be an issue, which will be the subject of the next slide. There's a little point. Do bodyweight exercises. Do lots of different sports. Drive the loading forces in different ways. But of course, we're all experts, aren't we? But you haven't done True Parenting 101. You didn't sign up for that course as soon as you knew you were going to have a little one, because no one runs that for you. No one helps. Well, Hockey Manitoba is trying to help you. Same with Hockey Canada in giving you information as to why you do things with 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14, and what's the difference between boys and girls between about 10 to 15 years of age, and why you need to treat them differently. So the overall growth curve in humans is somewhat sigmoidal, okay? So the first 4, 5, 6 years, quite a lot of change. Then there's a period of stability, and then all hell breaks loose when they go through puberty. Next graph. Same axis along the bottom, first 2 decades of life. And then this is slightly different. This arrow refers to there is always positive change here. And we're going to look at the rate of change in height in a calendar year. So down at the bottom of the red arrow, it's about 1 centimeter change in height. Up at the top, it's about 15 centimeters, okay, in a year. We're going to look at North American girls first. So here's North American girls. Excuse me, I was drawing with my mouse, and I couldn't quite control my hand. Okay, so you can see that in the first few years of life, there's a lot of change, very rapid growth in the first few months. You know that. The baby's growing long all of a sudden. It came out of the womb about this size. Then at suddenly age 2, you've got this little human standing next to you. But then at about that age, 2, 3 years of age, the growth rate slows quite dramatically. So you can see the flattening of the line. Okay, and it's quite stable. Now, it's not uniform. It doesn't mean to say now they're growing like, they grow 0.2 of a centimeter in January and 0.3 of a centimeter in February and so forth. It will be biased towards the summer months. Why? Because of the sun. Okay, got to get them outdoors. Try and keep them outdoors in the winter if you can. Very powerful modality and driver, the sun. It drives all life on the planet. So that's important. The next thing, of course, is they don't grow uniform when they are growing. When they get to that bottom bit before the spike, that sudden upswing marks the start of the pubertal growth spurt. Okay, North American girls, that's around somewhere between 9 to 11 years of age, call it 10 to put it in the middle ground. And then you get this massive acceleration of growth in most girls. Up until that peak, which is known as peak height velocity, North American girls, that's about 12 to 13 years of age, plus or minus a year. Greatest rate of change in height. Okay? And why is height changing? Because it's the bones of the long part of the skeleton that grow rapidly during this phase. So obviously, the bones of the legs and the bones of the arms. But it's not uniform. 1 minute they look like orangutans, long arms. Next minute they're all legs, and then they're orangutans again, and then they're all legs, and then finally it gradually stabilizes out. And you come over the top, and as that period, as you come over the top is changing, what's happening is, and why you're not getting much more growth is, let's say in the femur, the thigh bone, the growth plates are starting to close around the ends of the bone. Once that has happened, about 18 months after peak height velocity, then that bone won't grow in length anymore. Okay? With me on that? So now the overall rate of change, as that starts to happen to the long bones, as you come down the slope, you don't get as much change in height. So how is it? Once the long bones have closed their growth plates, we keep getting taller. Well, it's because the spine grows last in terms of the biggest changes. It continues, well, that's not fair. It's been growing, but it's not as growing at the same sort of rate or contribution to overall height. But of course, you don't get like the fifth lumbar vertebrae growing like 6 centimeters. It just grows a few millimeters. So overall, the skeleton slows in its rate of growth until finally you reach your adult height. With me on that? Now here's the other interesting thing for girls. At around, as you come over that peak, again about 18 to 20 months post-height, peak height velocity, you'll get the onset, assuming they're getting enough sleep, they're not stressed too much, okay, and they're eating well enough, you get the onset of menarche, okay? And that should be a normal expectation. Once the growth spurt starts to slow, you'll get the menstrual period starting to come in and take effect, and hopefully getting into a set pattern. That's another reason for those of you coaching girls versus boys to understand these type of things, because it has great implications. The other challenge for you is at around peak height velocity. You know, like a crunchy bar? You know crunchy bars? It's chocolate on the outside, honeycomb in the middle. Well, imagine that crunchy bar with none of the honeycomb, just the chocolate shell. It's quite fragile, right? That's what the bones look like of the long part of the skeleton at that peak height velocity, because the honeycomb, the trabecular bone, hasn't really developed yet. That happens in a sequence next. And guess what is the driving force for that trabecular bone? You might think calcium. Yes. Well, it's a good supporting thing, but the primary thing is loading forces on the skeletal system. Maybe a light has gone on because, of course, loading forces will be coming at you from the direction in which the body is being exposed to loading forces. Go figure. So if all you do is run, the loading forces will be coming at you predominantly through the lower extremities and in certain directions. If all you do is skate and play hockey, you will respond in terms of the trabecular bone development to do with that. It is another reason why through this period of time you do lots of different activities with them, to expose them to as many different stimuli as possible to build a strong skeletal system. Because you know what? If you don't do it then, what will happen over time, because peak bone mineral density will be reached at the end of this period of time, second decade, early third decade, so somewhere between 19 to maybe 23 in these females, there will gradually be a massive decline over the next 6 decades. And out here is osteoporosis. So if you haven't done a good enough job down here when they were teenagers in building that bone mineral density, you screw them over back here. But we want to win down here, don't we? So we do just one thing with them. We have girls dropping out of sports constantly when they reach that peak. They don't know what's going on with them. We coat them in lycra in many sports. We show them models of magazines with models and God knows what else. And we say, you've got to look like this, when there's not a hope in hell over this period of time they're going to look like that. And they drop out like lemmings. And yet through this period of time, from about 12 through to 18, is absolutely the most critical time to keep girls in physical activity. And there is nothing finer as a basis than something like hockey or ringette. Here's North American boys. Exactly the same. But you didn't need me to tell you that boys grow later than girls, and they end up taller. And you can see it here. They grow later, and because their growth spurt is more pronounced, they end up taller. Pretty easy, huh? All the same type of stuff as with the girls. Here's the interesting thing. The dotted line is to do with the bone mineral density. The green phase is telling you this is a perfect time to teach lots of skills. Running, jumping, throwing, skipping, catching, hitting, skating, learning to receive a puck, learning to handle a puck, lots and lots of time, because then they're going to go through this orange phase of massive disruption. And interesting, if I took those 14-year-old boys, okay, top of that light blue, so 14-year-old boys, so that's what? That's the 2001 borns right now, okay, 2001s. There could be easily a 48-month biological spread in terms of their true age. So you're looking at those 14-year-olds, and you could look at a 12-year-old versus a 16-year-old physically. And you're going to tell me that you can actually deal with them effectively? Not a hope in hell. You'll need to take a Valium and just chill out for a few years, because that's the reality. But this is why streaming cam tiering can be good if you use it well, which isn't about the outcome of a meaningless set of games. It's about doing the right programming for these kids. That's what it's about. But we use it purely for the outcome. Previous presentation, and you heard the statement by Babcock. Don't worry about the outcome. Think about the process. That's our responsibility to them. That's our moral obligation. So this period of time, it's really difficult for you. You've got massive variation. This is average, so you're going to have kids that don't grow on this pathway. They grow suddenly later. Maybe someone suddenly grows at 16, or a girl is suddenly, she's 5'8" at age 10, and that's where she's going to be. Then you get some kids that maybe it's not so pronounced. They just grow steadily over a long period of time. So you're going to expect those variations as well. We all understand this. You go the first 2 decades of life, you go to grade school. There's lots of research to show all the different stages in any number of endeavors, okay? And this is actually where many of these long-term athlete development guides come from. What would you do for kids? This is one from John Cote at Queen's University, where he leaves it for more of a sociological one. He says, parents put their kids into entry-level sports. The kids choose what they like. They're doing lots of sampling of different sports. This is what I like. So then they start investing in a particular sport, and maybe they're good enough, they're elite. And then we have the classic Canadian long-term athlete development guides. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. This is the basic fundamental construct. It's just like going to school. In the first few years, you develop fundamental movement skills, like running. You then develop fundamental sports skills, so now you put that running into a particular sport. Okay, so you've got to do the basics. You learn skating, and you put that into a particular sport. You learn to hit an implement against something else, and you put that into a particular sport. You learn to catch something, and you put that into it. You get the idea, the difference between a movement skill and then the actual sport-specific component? You can't catch, kind of rules out a lot of sports, right? Get the idea? But there's a component to learning to catch. And you want to be able to learn how to catch before you put some great big bucket on the end of their hand, which kind of rules out a lot of the fundamentals. That's where these documents come from. Or even the Americans in I Am Potential and their construct. Here's a little video quickly that the Americans actually provided. I think this gives a lot of the flavor of what I'm trying to get across to you.
Sometimes we do things based on tradition and not really what makes sense for child development, for athletic development. It's sort of what we've always done.
For the past decade, we've been trying to develop kids in one sport, and we've been focusing on one sport and overtraining them to a point where maybe they're getting burned out and it's leading to more injury. Now you get a mindset, and you have an organization like USA Hockey telling you that they've looked into this, and what's really good for kids is to give them a variety of sports, to have them trained to be athletes and not necessarily trained to be good in one sport. And when you get this coming from an organization like USA Hockey, hopefully it trickles down. It's got to go to the coaches next, it's got to go to the parents from there, and hopefully we're doing the right thing for kids.
Get the football going, Charlie!
The American development model places the kids first and foremost. It's athlete-centered. As adults, we've implemented a lot of things that make sense in our world, but really don't make sense in terms of athlete development. What the American development model does is it tries to put the kid first. So if we make our decisions as administrators, coaches, and parents, that we're putting the athlete first, then we're going to have success with our children.
This isn't something that's a guess. This is a bright group of people that have a wealth of knowledge in childhood development, exercise physiology, the sport of hockey itself, that have come together to try to create a comprehensive model that our kids can participate in. The
impetus behind the American development model came from us trying to evaluate our sport and what we could do better, not just for our game, but for our kids. The ADM's not a mandate. It's a set of guidelines put forth by USA Hockey to help clubs and associations be better at what they do with their kids. And with the gracious support of the National Hockey League, we've been able to put forth this model that really USA Hockey had never had in the past. It's easy to convince the people at the top end, people with a vast amount of hockey experience, college head coaches, NHL people, that this is a great thing. And it just shows in the quality of people that have been able to say, you know what, I've made a decision that I'm not going to coach just my hockey team. I'm going to try and help American hockey be better.
My favorite winter sport is hockey because there's so many rinks and all my friends play, and I can just go up and play hockey with them and spend the day there. I play catcher in baseball, so I don't know why, I just like the stuff flying at me and putting on the pads.
We've got kids, young kids at early specialization playing hockey 12 months a year, and late generalization where kids are playing multiple sports at older ages. And the model that has been proven to have success is reverse, is just the opposite, where it's early generalization, where we have kids playing multiple sports and athleticism is developed. And then as you get older and you decide what you're inclined and where your strengths might be, you start to specialize in certain things.
And I think as a parent, a lot of times you feel the pressure, that you've got to keep your kids. If your kids want to be good in sports and they want to make it to the next level, you feel like you have to keep putting them in the same sport. My kids play baseball, my kids play hockey, they play golf, and I think they've enjoyed it. I think they've benefited from it because they're able to become athletes, not just specific in one sport at the age of 11 years old, but they become good athletes in all sports.
Sometimes I go open skating with my friends. There's always a game going on. Sometimes it's 2 adults games, sometimes 1 kid's game, 1 adult, sometimes a broom ball reserve game. So there's always something to do.
We need to start focusing on the kid and what's good for them, as opposed to getting them into a sport and trying to grind them into the ground and create the next superstar. Let kids be kids, let them have fun at what they're doing, and that's what this is. It's an age-appropriate development program for children.
I love practice because we get a lot of shots, more puck time, more time to work on glove saves, blocker saves, leg saves, butterfly, anything.
We need to change the mindset of our coaches, our administrators, and our parents, and they need to understand that it's not just my team has practice today, because that's very inefficient. If we're putting 14, 15 kids on one ice surface when they're 8 years old, then we're not maximizing, one, the benefits for the kids and the cost effectiveness for the association, that allocation of resources. And putting a 14-year-old on the ice with a 10-year-old in some ways is very, very beneficial to both. We need to think outside the box a little bit in how we develop our athletes and how we allocate those resources.
This is an opportunity for us to get it right. And it's getting it right by listening to those that are dedicating their lives trying to understand this process.
This is just a start. The ADM provides us an opportunity to interact with our volunteers that we have out in the field, learn ideas from them, and hopefully take those things and apply it to our kids and to our associations. We want to share what we learn through our website and our materials that we develop. This is an ongoing process that we know is going to take time, but we know will pay great dividends for our kids. The tagline for the ADM is "I am potential." And that really excites me because we all want to see our kids reach their fullest potential. And that's why the ADM is the best thing that's happened to hockey in a full generation.
Why do I work in development for many other countries, despite the fact that I'm responsible for performance sports in Canada? Well, I do it because I believe strongly in doing the right thing from an ethical point of view for youngsters. And because I believe in competition, you know, it's a perverse thing. I want our competition to be as good as possible. And then we beat them. That's the goal. So yeah, I helped the Finns, I helped the Swedes, I helped even the Russians recently. And so do others, and even the Americans down south. And I've also done it because of deep frustration. I started on this journey around athlete development 25 years ago. 25 years ago. We published Canadian Sport for Life as the Pop Science document in 2005. And you know what I lose sleep over every night when I go to bed? Is that the 5-year-old, when we published that document, is now 15, and we've done nothing for him or her. Time goes by. It's up to us, the adults, to change these systems for children to do the right thing. Take our egos out of the equation. Absolutely, us. And trying is lying. Remember the Yoda phrase, to do or do not, there is no try? You will either do these things or you won't, and you will have no one else to blame, but you will be answerable, ultimately, to those children. That's why I do this. So I give up my weekends to come and do these type of things because I believe in the amazing array of talent we have in this room. If you count it up in years, the experience we have in hockey and probably lots of other sports in this room, we've got hundreds of years in here. Surely we can put our collective minds and the effort we put in every single week into these volunteer pursuits and actually have something really productive to show for it at the end. That's why I do it. And then, of course, I want to beat the hell out of the Americans whenever we can. This little diagram is just to show you these phraseologies that you might come across in many of these documents. They use very similar terminology. This is actually Canadian terminology. And at each phase, okay, so if we look at training to train, that's probably in most of the late recruitment sports, somewhere between about 10 to 14 years of age. They have a dashboard. And if we looked at one of these particular ones, notice where the words training to compete and train to win come. Late. Not worried about winning down at the bottom. Very few early recruitment sports. early specialization. These are largely limited to female sports and largely to the artistic things. These are like figure skating, gymnastics, but note a big difference between the age of the female gymnastics and the age of the males. The males are much older. Remember that little thing, testosterone and strength, okay? Got to wait a little bit, be a bit more patient. Remember the girls are developing earlier. And even then, gymnastics raised the age at which you're allowed to compete internationally, about 1.5 Olympic cycles ago. You have to, what else? Diving, dance, of course. These are all relatively early recruitment things. Interesting enough, they're all foundation skills as well for athleticism. So you want to do them when you're young. Helps hockey. What does gymnastics for hockey look like? What does dance for hockey look like? And don't laugh. We've got several NHL teams that do dance still. Let's have a look at this. So train to compete. What does a dashboard look like? This is for hockey, and we're going to look specifically at performance now. So there's a number of things that help towards performance. There's competition with a whole bunch of metrics that you need to focus on. There's the on-ice component of what you're trying to do. And then obviously there's the off-ice component. And each of those dashboards through the age groups has key performance areas that you need to work on. But they're not all the same. Because the 10-year-old is not a 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old is not a 14-year-old, and so forth. You need to think about performance tracking. This is just a glorified way of saying, what does the dashboard look like? That's the continuum, the performance envelope of everyone that gets good. Remember that high performance mark we said? So everyone that gets there, you probably saw them coming. And they all gradually started to get more clone-like, so that the closer they get to expertise, they can all do similar things to the same level of ability. But there's lots of people that are not reaching that level, that are outside that envelope. The problem is younger downwards, you don't know that. And even sports science, after hundreds of years now, well, 100 years of systematic sports science, 50 certainly, can't tell you at a very young age. You know what's one of the most important things? The scouting report and a team of scouts. What are you all looking for? That's why actually, the Canadian population can name 90% of Team Canada at any one moment in time, because we all watch a lot of hockey. We've all got a clue of who's good. What do the defensemen look like? What do the centers look like? What do the goalies look like? We can all do it. And we don't argue until we start looking at the bubble. Even the press do it. Every time the Olympic team is selected, they all agree with about 90% of the team, and then it's the outliers that we argue about. And even the Canadian public can do that, because we do have that sense of purpose. The problem is, the younger and younger and younger you go, you start to run into real problems, because other things are actually determining the performance level you're looking at. That's why I showed you all that growth and maturation stuff, and particularly that fog of puberty. Because just because someone is bigger and more powerful in a particular sport where that's important at an early age, doesn't mean they're necessarily that good. Especially not when everyone else gets to the stage where they're equally big and strong and powerful. But of course, you may have cut them before they get that chance to be that big and strong and powerful. So what does the dashboard look like? Getting close to finishing here. Here's a 9-year-old soccer player. You'll notice they're not on a soccer pitch. They're in an urban environment. Okay? It's just them. This is that concept of throw the puck to the kid. Show me what you can do with that. Show me how you control. Show me skate around, do something with that puck. 5 minutes, off you go. Do you think this kid was taught this? How did he get to be this good? Now, this is the outlier. This is someone on the other edge of the curve. This kid is so good, even at gross motor skills and fine motor skills, that he'll point at the bar, kick the ball off the bar, that he even pulls up his pants at one point. Points at the crossbar.
I know I can be what I wanna be. If I work
So I
hard
put up his
at
pants
it,
just there.
I'll be where I wanna be.
Be boys and girls, listen up. You can be
ask
anything
yourself,
in the world, and God we
teach
trust. An architect,
tactics to
doctor,
this kid.
maybe an actress, but nothing comes
think this
easy.
kid
It takes
can
much
find
practice. I
self-time on
know
the
I can be what I wanna be. If I work hard.
And a beautiful smile to finish. Now I'm going to close. I've got one video to show you. There's a load of other stuff that maybe we might put a little video together and me explaining these last few slides to you and put it online for you. I think I'll do that. What I've done in the building that I control, the 3 campuses at Winsport, we've got this amazing hockey facility, 3 NHL rinks and then an international arena. Because, of course, Team Canada, when we play international, sooner or later we have to move out of North America. So whenever we do that, we have to play on an international surface. So our main arena, 4,000 seats plus some boxes, we have the ability to change the size of it. So it's usually permanently international, and that's where the national teams come in. Because it does make a difference in some of the tactics that we play. And even though we were ridiculed before the Sochi Games by playing ball hockey with Team Canada, we did it with a purpose. Mike Babcock was absolutely able to get to all the tactics by playing ball hockey. That's where we really learnt the system of the wider lanes, all that type of stuff. So even though the press made fun of us and it was all joking around, there was real sense of intent of purpose to what we were doing. So I'll send you these last few slides with a bit of an explanation as to what we're doing. But I want to show you this final video. And what I meant by that, within the walls of Winsport, my golden rule with Hockey Canada, with Paul Carson, with Corey McNabb, was we do not repeat the madness that goes on outside here. You want to come as a minor association, you want to come as a team, you want to come as a player, this is what we're going to do. Otherwise, you don't have to come here. That's your choice. But this is what we're going to do. So we do cross ice. We do dry land that looks like this. We're going to go right back to the basics with you. We're going to teach your brain as much as we will anything else in terms of how you handle the puck. We're not going to have pathetic practice-to-game ratios. And we're certainly not going to do any kind of scrutiny on you until we've actually taught you something and given you a chance to really learn that particular skill. This last video that I want to show, don't worry about all this stuff. I'm going to whip through it. It's called the 51st Door. And one of the things I'm starting to do, and this colleague of mine, Eddie Pinheiro, is a philosopher. And the 51st Door concept, I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because you're going to hear about it. But I want you to understand this. It comes back to the concept of that you can leave here this weekend, okay, with all this amazing information and not do anything with it. Or you can choose to really do something very differently here in Manitoba, and particularly in any of the big environmental areas, in urban areas. So I'm just going to show you this little diagram and then the video. So you can imagine any geographical area, we could divide into quadrants. Let's say, call it Winnipeg. We could divide it into quadrants. Now, in each of these quadrants, you've got a minor association or you've got a particular team in a community. So let's call it a community level. And just for sake of argument, I've divided all the areas into nice synonymous ones. So they're nicely set out, right? So in each quadrant of the city, you've got a number of teams. You could have more than this, okay? What I'm trying to say to you is you can do things independently or you can start to work together. And you need to do both. You need to do both. You need to think about the breakfast club in each of those blue dots because that's where the kids live. You want to cut down travel as much as possible because it's an unnecessary expense that we've got used to. We've professionalized age group sport to such an extent that hockey has become so bloody expensive that we're starting to ostracize and exclude many segments of the Canadian population. And yet, you know what? There are 3 things that dictate international success at the highest level of sport. Population size, money spent in the system, useful, and the political significance and social significance of sport in that society. Population being the big one. We can't afford to lose a single child if you want to give Team Canada the chance of winning in the future, because other countries are out-punching their weight. We've been lucky because we have hundreds of thousands of children that start out on this journey. A journey, of course, that very few will finish in terms of high-performance hockey. That's just the reality. There's only X number of places on an Olympic team or into the NHL. There's only 3 places on an Olympic podium, not 7 billion, otherwise we could all do it. More importantly than this, what we need to develop is centers of excellence in each quadrant, in each area. Maybe that's a particular higher level team, or what it is, it's a body of people that the whole area can rely on to help them. These people do have expertise. And then maybe there's one big one that everyone can work on. And we need to get to the understanding of actually having outreach programs where the best kids and the best coaches come together to gather knowledge every so often from these centers, and so forth and so forth. But by the same token, we have outreach programs, and we will learn to work together. Who are the people? We're not always in competition with each other. Certainly, when we come to compete, no matter what the age group, we're going to compete tough but fair. If you do this type of stuff, you will lead the nation. I guarantee it, because no one is doing this. No one is doing this, except, of course, the best competitions against us, increasingly so. The 51st door, coming up. Enjoy.
Everyone wants something. We all have goals, desires. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Yet 99% of people either never make a move toward what they want or they burn out, right? The gym is always a lot less crowded May 1st than it is January 1st. When that realization hits that improving yourself won't be some walk in the park, people begin to fall off. It's no longer worth it for them. So how do successful people get past that monotony, that struggle? What is the mindset that supports that growth? Because obviously that's key, right? Athletes, entertainers, all these people that are successful in the business world, it's not so much their genetics that separate their potential from yours, as it is their mentality and how they view the world as an instrument, not an inhibitor. They know with 100% certainty that pushing will get them what they want. And this confidence enables them to deal with all the negativity and the suffering they have to face to get there. It's a means to an end. John Paul DeJoria. Guy is a billionaire. He founded Patron Liquors, Paul Mitchell Hair Products. And at one point in his life, this guy's living in LA, sleeping in the back of his car with his son, right? Homeless, he has nothing. And I was recently listening to one of his talks. Someone asked him, John Paul, how can I be more like you? How can I be the next big billionaire entrepreneur? And he says, I have two pieces of advice for you that are instrumental to any success you'll have. The first one is you need to acknowledge and accept that doors are going to be slammed in your face all the time. If you don't have the strength in yourself to keep walking, to keep moving to the next door, then you don't really have a shot. The second thing he said is you need to be as enthusiastic on the 51st door that you knock on as you were on the first door. Because yes, door 1 through 50 could shut right in your face. But that 51st door could just be the one that changes your life. But if you give in or you let your energy fade, after a few failures, a couple negative experiences, you'll never be able to walk through it. And what a tragedy that would be. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Back in his bodybuilding days, he's Mr. Universe, best bodybuilder in the world. He goes through these grueling 5-hour-a-day training sessions. Someone asks him, hey Arnold, how come every time I see you at the gym, you're smiling? Right, I look at the other bodybuilders in here, they're not smiling, they're very focused, very serious looks on their faces. And he says, because every rep I do, regardless of how bad it hurts, takes me one step closer to my goal. And that satisfaction brings me more happiness than anything else in the world. Both of these guys bring context to what it means to be truly committed to something. To what must be endured between right now, as you're listening to me speak, and the time you open your 51st door. When the gym, the office, the library, whatever it is in your context, when it starts to feel like a burden and you'd rather be on the couch or you'd rather be out with your friends, remind yourself of what that door opening is going to feel like and why concentrating on your next step forward means everything.
Here's the final point for you. You can choose to allow all these doors to slam on you. The traditional doors of hockey, we can't do this. Or you can walk through that 51st door, get past your own biases, and do the right thing. And that aspect of commitment is absolute. You can't be 50% committed, or 70% committed, or 80% committed to this. You either will do these things or you won't. It's pretty simple. Pretty simple. Thank you very much.